your lessons in your book is comparison is a losing game, which of course I completely agree with, because healing from trauma is not one size fits all, and
Right.
there's no need to compare. But my favorite part of this chapter was when you talked about self comparison and how it can be helpful, which is something that we just don't talk about and nobody really discusses because it's comparison, right? And you shouldn't. But for me, I know that we all like look so much to like where we want to be, where we want to go, where we should be, right? In that end game.
Right.
But when you take a step back and like look at where how far you've come, it's a really beautiful thing. And I would love for you to kind of elaborate on this and with the community to show them how like self-comparison can be helpful.
Yeah, so I think there's like two ways that it can be helped, or there are probably several more, but I'll mention two ways right now. Like we were talking about how like figuring out things that can help you heal. And I think self-comparison is a great way to figure out those things, because if you try something new, like for example, say you want to take up like a journaling practice and you've like never journaled before, and like first take note of like where you are before starting this practice, and then do it for a week consistently, and then check back in with yourself to see if there are any changes to how you feel, and comparing to where you were like after the journaling practice from like before the journaling practice, then you can determine whether or not that has been helpful to you. And if it is, incorporate it into your regular activities. If it's not, then see you later. Maybe try something else.
Right.
And so I think that's one way that comparison can be helpful. And then also, what you were talking about is kind of reflecting back on your healing journey. And I think that it's so important, especially in those moments when you get triggered or you have like another nightmare or like panic surfaces, and you're like, it can, like in those moments, it can feel like you're back to where you started. And these bad mental health days are inevitable. Like, I feel like no matter where you are on your healing journey, like something can come up, and then, you know, you,
Yeah.
you'll feel horrible and it sucks. But, unfortunately, it's still a part of healing. And in those moments you can be like, oh my gosh, like I'm doing so bad right now. Like, where, like, I thought that I was over this. Why am I back here? Why am I feeling this way? And it's really easy to be hard on yourself. Um, so I think like taking a step back and reminding yourself where you were, like before you started healing, at the very beginning of your healing journey, and comparing yourself to where you are now is can help you remember how far you've come, and it can kind of pull you out of that negative self-talk and change your perspective. Instead of being like, oh, I'm back at square one, like I've done all this healing work and for nothing, you can be like, hey, like at the beginning of my healing journey, I had panic attacks every day, sometimes multiple times a day, and now I had one panic attack this week. Like, that is significant progress.
Big.
Like that is huge. And it's like one panic attack doesn't erase all the progress that you made. So I think like that self-comparison, especially in those moments, is really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Oh, we are just so like our own biggest critics and beat ourselves up the
Yes.
most, right? That it really is hard to be able to even think back to that, right? It's like
Totally.
everything is just erased in between that, and it's really not. And it
Yeah.
is a journey. It was literally one of my favorite parts of the book. I was like, that is such good advice. Nobody talks about that. Like, so another one of your lessons is isolation isn't the answer. And it is so easy for us as trauma survivors to just want to push everyone away, hide inside our home, and just like it's safer that way, right? It really is. So, like, I would love for you to elaborate on it a little bit and maybe provide some advice for the community on tips to move away from the isolation because it's just safer. It feels safer in the isolation.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, when I was struggling the most, it's like when we're struggling the most, and when we and I mean, in retrospect, like now, like I can look back on that and be like, that's when I was struggling the most, that's when I needed connection and others most. But in those moments when I was living through it, I was so ashamed, and that shame kept me hiding. It was like I didn't know that there was anyone else in my life who was struggling with trauma. I thought that I was like the only person dealing with it. I thought I was like quote unquote crazy. Um, and there was a lot of stigma, and I internalized that stigma. And whenever I saw friends, like if I did go out and I did see people, I would always pretend that I was okay. And I was just like, put on the show, put on
Put
the
on the
mask,
mask.
and we all know that. And it's just like so for me, it was so exhausting pretending to be okay all the time. Like it takes a lot of effort to like pretend and like put on the fake smile and try to engage in conversations when inside you're just like I don't like I feel horrible. I don't want to be here. Like I just want to go and cry. And I feel like there were so many more moments when I like forced myself to go outside and see people, and I'd put on the show, and then like the second I'd get into my car or the second I'd make it home, I just like burst into tears and break down because it was just like I was just like bottling everything up. And I feel like when we do that, when we hide what we're really going through, or when we just completely isolate altogether and we don't allow ourselves to be seen and we don't allow ourselves to be connected, I think it adds to the pain that we're already feeling from the trauma, because like the layer of isolation and feeling alone just makes it one layer heavier.
Mm.
And it's just like I think back to those moments when I was just refused to go out, or when I did go out, like refused to actually really be seen as me. I just felt like I was stranded on my own little island, and just felt so alone in it. And that's incredibly painful. Um, and I think that, shifting to like not being so isolated, like of course it was hard to start doing it. So it's like I recommend that people like, because like when you're really isolated, like connection is so important, and just knowing that you're not alone can mean the world. Knowing that someone is there for you can make such a big difference. And if I recommend that someone start with someone who that they feel safest with, and if that person doesn't exist yet in their real lives, I think that's okay. There are safe spaces online, like your community.
Your community.
I just, people in the comments just like showing each other support, like someone saying like I'm really struggling here, and like just allowing themselves to be seen in that way. And then others in the community going in and being like, I see you, you aren't alone, hang in there. Like it's just like I think that those little connections, even from strangers that they don't even know on the internet, can be life-saving at times. So I think that, if there isn't someone in your life that you can go to and be like, hey, I'm struggling,
Yeah.
I think that there are safe spaces online, with strangers that can help you feel like you're less alone in your struggles, which can just make you feel a little bit lighter.
Yeah.
Um, like it's not going to erase your problems, of course, but just to know that you feel seen and that other people are seeing you can make a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And just that aspect too of not feeling like you're the only person who's going through this, right?
Yes.
That aspect of this is just me. There's something so wrong with me because it's only me. And I think that's why communities like yours and mine are so important, because it really does give people an opportunity outside of their immediate circle or world that they live in physically to explore and discover that, like, wow, there's a lot of other people out there who have been through similar situations as me, or are currently going through similar situations as me. And I mean, you know it, right? The love and support that you see in these comments is just so, like, heart touching.
It is. It is. Yeah, I know. It's like when you're carrying so much shame, which is what's driving that isolation a lot of the time. It's it can release the shame when you do see other people going through it and you're like, okay, there's not something just inherently wrong with me.
Yeah.
And I'm like not defective or damaged for feeling this way. Um, yeah, it it just can mean so much.
It really can. It really can. And since we're on the topic of shame, as we know, like so many trauma survivors, shame, self blame, um, and you obviously talk about it in your book as well, but is there other ways that trauma survivors can begin, like, shifting that perspective and learning how to give ourselves compassion and kindness instead of piling on that shame and blame?
Yeah, I think that like a lot of us um who've experienced childhood trauma, like we have like these really strong inner critics, and you know, our self-esteem isn't all that great. And that's something that we struggle with. And so we like develop this negative self-talk at a young age, and it just feels natural at this point. After living with this negative self-talk for so long, that's just what comes naturally. And I think one way, this is what's been helpful for me for like shifting, for starting to shift out of that, like obviously I'm still a work in progress, is to number one, notice that negative self-talk when it's taking place. Because for me, it was so easy for it to just spiral, like
Over.
I would, yes, like I'd make one mistake on something and I'd be like, oh my gosh, that was so stupid. And then it's just like, then I would start digging up all the other things that are wrong with me and just like pile it on and just like beat myself up. And then it would eventually lead to a breakdown, where I'd like not want to do anything and I'd just be like crying. So like noticing the negative self-talk and kind of just like stopping it in its tracks there before it starts to spiral out of control, was like step one for me, just noticing when it was taking place. Because again, it can just feel like this is just how it is, like this is what's
Yeah.
natural. But I think one thing that I want to remind people is that our inner critics only exist to tell us what is wrong with us and to show us how like not enough we are. And they aren't telling the whole side of the story. They only have one point of view and they are just there to pick us apart. So it's like a very one-sided story. So I think it's important to start to introduce positive self-talk, which can be really hard. It's
Difficult,
like
yes.
if you're not used to it, it can feel like you're lying to yourself in a way. This is definitely how I felt at first. But you know, like if we're going back to like, you know, the making a mistake example, like say you catch yourself calling yourself like a stupid idiot for making a mistake. Um, and it like, okay, so you notice your inner critic come out. And then in order to offset it, you could say something to yourself like, you know, you made a mistake. All humans make mistakes. You're trying your best. And that's like not lying to yourself, but it's providing some comfort and stopping your inner critic so it doesn't keep building and spiraling into something where it just gets out of control and then
Yeah, that you can't come back from.
yes, exactly. So introducing this comforting, kind self-talk, and I think this is, advice that a lot of people have, but to try to talk to yourself like you would talk to a friend who's having a hard time that you're trying to comfort, because I think that we all deserve the kindness that we give to other people, right? Um, and introducing this kind self-talk, it like also like in my mind it like kind of balances it out if like the negative self-talk is just one side and we have like some positive self-talk coming in, and then it creates like an inner dialogue that is actually much closer to what's happening in reality, because the negative self-talk is just like can just be out of control at
Yeah,
times.
yeah. You're getting like both sides of the story now instead of just
Exactly.
one. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. That's great advice. That really is because you can get on that spiral and into that hamster wheel, and once you're down in that black hole, it is really difficult to pull yourself out.
It is. And I mean, it can like it can mess you up for days. Like unfortunately. So it's like just learning to catch yourself when it's happening is, I mean, if you can do that, that is a huge win. Like that is huge progress.